Hey, my name is Pierce Brown, the author of the Red Rising Saga, and I'm back to answer some more of your burning questions. All right, Stephen O., California. If Darrow's Howler number 1 and Sevro's Howler number 2, who would be first in line for Howler number 3? And that would be Pebble, because she's the unofficial mother of the Howlers and is making sure that everyone has their carbohydrates and everyone's blood sugar is up, and she's taking care of making sure that everyone is showing up to battle in perfect physical fitness. James P. from Alabama. What was your main goal or motivation to come back to Red Rising after the ending of Morning Star? The ending of Book 3 wrapped up most of the threads and gave everyone a satisfying conclusion. But now that I'm 70% of the way through Iron Gold, it feels to me as if this is the type of story you were meant to write. Well, thank you, James P. I was halfway through Morning Star, probably on the second draft, maybe the first draft, and I realized that there was so much more of the story I wanted to tell, because the first 3 books are an exploration of archetypes, plucky rebellion, an empowered hero who's risen to prominency and toppled the empire, so to speak. But what I wanted to do is look through the eyes of characters that he inadvertently trampled along the way, the people that have grudges against him, and to see whether or not the motivations and also the morals of the Rising could withstand the scrutiny of 10 years of war. Did you struggle to write perspectives outside of Darrow and Iron Gold, or did it feel freeing to finally step outside the mind of the Reaper? I'd say both. I think one of my favorite things is seeing the perspective that other characters have around Darrow, but I also think that trying to be true to those other perspectives can slow down the writing process when it's just one character and you don't have to change your diction, you don't have to change the flow of words, you don't have to change the general flow of how they see the world, like the perspective. Then your books can be really quickly written. But when you're jumping back and forth between characters, particularly when there's causation between those characters, it can definitely slow down the writing process. So I think while I was initially very excited about it and also have a lot of fun doing it, it does complicate things by a factor of 4, probably even greater than that. I think that's why you've seen the slowdown in the writing process between these books, because I'm trying to do each character justice. Joachim W., Veenendaal, Netherlands. Or if the first 3 books would have multiple POVs as well, which characters would have been POV characters? Oh, I love this question. One of my favorite books ever was Ender's Shadow, which showed Ender's Game, but from the perspective of Bean. I think that I would love to see the first 3 books from the perspective of Virginia and of Cassius. But then I think also one that would be really interesting would be Fitchner as well. There's a temptation to want to do Sevro, but I don't think we're meant to ever know what actually goes inside his mind. I would do a third-person perspective on Sevro. I wouldn't like to do a first-person perspective from his character. Gabby D., Cincinnati, Ohio. Are the first 3 books of Red Rising a finished series and the next 3 a continuation? The first 3 are a completed series in and of their own right, but if you want the story to continue and if you're curious to see how Darrow and his friends face the challenges of the victory that they had in Morning Star, then you can continue. Jacob W., Montreal, Canada. What did most Golds do in the society before the Rising? I love this question. Did most hold state, business, military positions, or did they freeload on assets that gave them income? Most of them were freeloaders. If you look in the text, there's about 130,000 Peerless Guard in the entire solar system. With 18 billion people, it's a pretty small number. The Peerless Guard were the ones who were holding the high-ranking positions in the military and within the government. But most of the Golds were pixies who were freeloading, either subsisting on the ill-gotten gains of their ancestors or on stipends from the government. But there's a big gulf between a pixie gold and a Peerless Guard. Peerless Guard usually either coming from an old family that has many more resources than a regular gold family, or someone who's been sponsored by a patron, like an Augustus or a Bologna, who brings someone up because of their merit into their gold family. Derek H., Yakima, Washington. What was the main inspiration for Darrow? Did it change as the books got darker and darker? Main inspiration is somewhat of a composite between Edmond Dantes from The Count of Monte Cristo, which is one of my favorite literary characters. Also has some shades of Paul Muad'Dib in there because Dune was so influential in my reading experience when I was young. And I think he also was a vessel for myself because I'd just come out of school and was working a bunch of dead-end jobs and didn't have a vehicle to feel empowerment. And Darrow was someone who had concrete goals and could summon all of his strength to persevere for a noble goal. And I wanted more than anything a mission in life. So Darrow's kind of a composite between characters that I'd admired throughout my reading career beforehand and also what I wanted to become. Omar H., Buckinghamshire, UK. How are you able to create such an amazing cast of characters in your books? Stop. What is the creation process behind the characters and the writing of them? Like Red Rising genuinely has some of the best casted characters I have ever come across in fantasy and sci-fi. I like you, Omar H. You have good questions. The characters for me are usually kind of a study in contrast, internal contrast. So to create a compelling character, I want a character who's going to be at war with themselves. So if they want something in life, they have to have something standing in their way. And you could make it a physical opposition or a physical threat against them, but I think it's more interesting if something inside them pulls them the other direction and creates a shearing force. And so you see with Darrow wants to protect his people and to save his people, yet he doesn't want to become a bad man. And so that shearing force inside him of wanting to be a father, just wanting to have a simple life, and then having to be something more for Eo's dream is what creates, I think, the tension with his character. Sevro, for instance, has shearing forces because he is a very loyal person and wants love and craves love more than many of the characters, yet has been conditioned to rejection. And so he puts up this ugly mask in order to reject people before they reject him first. So usually I try to see what inside a character seems inherently contradictory, and will kind of that'll give me ammunition as I explore their character throughout the rest of the series. Chris E., not Chris E., Philomath, Oregon. Your writing has evolved so much through your saga. Is there a specific reason or experience that you can attribute this to, or is this just an example of an artist refining your craft? I'd like to think that it's just an example of an artist sharpening his craft. And every time I write a new book, I have new skills that are usually come from the struggle of creating the last book. And as I improve as an artist, hopefully my taste continues to expand. And you think about it, the first book I wrote when I was 22, and I didn't have the same amount of time that I'd put into sharpening my craft. And I think that over time, the 10,000 hour rule, you get better, but then also you can lose some confidence because you know how little you know and the more you do your craft. So I hope to continue to improve and make each book better than the last. Aneka B. Character deaths are frequent. What goes into the decision-making of choosing who dies? Well, I do have one thing that makes it sometimes very easy or very difficult on me, depending on how I'm feeling in the moment. It's called my hat of death. Sometimes I need to demonstrate the capriciousness of war, so I put all the names of the characters, except for one or two, into a hat and then draw at random from that hat. Certain characters, particularly in the first one with, I don't want to say a spoiler, but a large and beloved character, that's how he died. The other characters, sometimes it's the culmination of their arc, leads to a death that feels inevitable but surprising in the same way. But I also enjoy interrupting arcs because I think in life, the trauma of death is felt the most when you see the future that was robbed from the person who's passed away. And an interrupted arc, especially when you can envision how a character is going to change or how a character is going to impact the story, but then is cut short, feels almost like an injustice. But I think that injustice is often the heart and soul of a story because it can bring out an emotional reaction that feels very earnest. Oliver S., Portland, Oregon. Could you rank the top 5 duelists in the Red Rising universe? You know, I know you guys want me to power rank them, but I'm not going to do that. If they were in a situation where there was just 2 men in a room with their blades, yeah, I could power rank them for you perhaps, but the thing is, every single one of these duelists is going to try to make sure that the odds are in their favor before they actually fight. They want it to be unfair because they all want to live. Because I think you get to a certain point and everyone's has the capacity to kill everyone else. That's how good they are. So maybe 5 times out of 5 it would go one way, 5 times out of 5 it would go the other way if Diomedes fought Darrow or Darrow fought the Minotaur on even ground. So I'll leave that one vague and up for debate. Jordan K., Quebec, Canada. What real-life jobs would the Red Rising characters have? I mean, this is probably the toughest question. I think that Darrow would be some sort of like lumberjack or, honestly, maybe a farmer. Victra would just be fabulous, probably from old money, so I think she'd just swan around on her yacht. Virginia would be some sort of philanthropist or politician. Sevro would be in jail. And Ragnar would be a UFC fighter or like in the WWE. I mean, the guy's like 7.5 feet tall and 400 pounds. I don't think that he would do anything particularly, how to say, intellectual. I think he'd be a physical creature. Maximilian N., Barrington, New Hampshire. Have you ever played D&D? And if you have, what are your thoughts on a campaign setting in the Red Rising universe? Who would be your big bad at the end? I have played D&D. I really enjoy it, but I have found that playing D&D is a lot like writing a book. And so if I have a D&D game scheduled with friends on Saturday morning and I've been writing all week, kind of the last thing I want to do is take a made-up character on a made-up story. I have a lot of fun being the Dungeon Master. I have a lot of fun doing it, but to be honest, the engine gets a little tired at times. At the same time, I would think it would be amazing to have Red Rising D&D, particularly with the variety of stories you could have and the different big bads you could have, depending on the level of story. Like if it's many of the people in the party are grays or reds, you could have someone like Aron T. Flavinius be the villain. But if you have golds on your team, I think like an Aja, because no one fights Aja and lives. So Aja, maybe an Olympic Knight. There's a lot of villains you can pick from the Red Rising world. But it'd also be really fun to pick, like, I don't know, a Rage Knight from 200 years before Darrow's around. Jonas B., Dusseldorf, Germany. What the hell is your beauty secret? I stay inside all day and write books. A Cat S., Germany. Vampire or werewolf? Oh, vampire, every day. I think that comes down to longevity for me, because if you're a vampire, I mean, gosh, you could live for hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't think werewolves have the same longevity. Plus, then there's something very kind of unsanitary about werewolves, and the smell. I already have a pretty good sense of smell, and I don't know if I'd want a better sense of smell. Particularly living in Los Angeles and being in New York right now, it'd probably be a bad thing to be able to smell everything. As a vampire, I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. You get to go through you get to be like eternally goth. I would love that. Nicole C., North Carolina. In Chapter 18, Morning Star, a gray working security for Sun Industries releases a robot on Darrow and the Howlers, but just prior warns them with, "You have 5 seconds to comply." Is this a reference to RoboCop 1987? Yes, it is, and you were the first one to find that Easter egg. That makes me very happy because I forgot that was in there. Justin D., Georgia. I would love to know what happened to the Warden's dog after Tongueless died. I very much would too. I think we might have to find out what happened to him in Red God. Jordan L., Somerville, Massachusetts. Thank you for reigniting my interest in reading with Red Rising. Can I buy you coffee sometime? Sure, if you see me in the street, I'd love a coffee. Jamie B., Mississippi. Do you believe true revolution is ever possible without becoming what you were trying to destroy? Gosh, I think if I had an answer for that question, I wouldn't be writing this series. One of the things that I think is really important for me in exploring this series is doing just that, exploring these kind of questions. And if I had the answer to that locked away somewhere inside, then I think that I wouldn't have the interest in writing the books 4 through 7. I think that Darrow and Virginia have to face this and answer this in Red God, and that will probably be where we find my answer to this question. Selena H., Phoenix, Arizona. Would you rather lose the ability to read any new books or the ability to reread books you've already read? I would like to lose the ability to reread books I've already read. So much for me about books is the constant exploration and expanding my worldview. If I was unable to read new books and only able to reread books that I've read, then I think I would just be solidifying my opinions. And I don't think that that's very good for anyone. I think that we should always be constantly changing and challenging our worldview and continuing to expand. Otherwise, I think I'd run out of gas in the tank to write my own books. Good question, though. Tricky one to read. James S., Bromsgrove, UK. Red Rising got me back into reading after 15 years of not doing it. I was just wondering, what's your favorite cheese? Oh, this is a tricky question. Yeah, I was actually just thinking this the other day, and cheddar is great, but I think it's Gruyere. There's something about the solidity of it, and it's really tangy, and it's aged in like Swiss caves. Gruyere. Thank you for your very important question. From multiple Howlers around the world, what advice do I have for aspiring writers? I think the most important advice I can give you is not to write the book that you think people want to read, but instead write the book that you want to read. Write the book that you want to exist, because otherwise you're trying to be performative and you're trying to predict what either the market wants, what you think will get published, or what do you think will interest people, when in reality, you're never going to be the best writer. I'm never going to be the best writer. There's always going to be someone better at the craft, but what you can do better than anyone else is show your taste, explore things that are interesting to you. And they say write what you know, but what I really think that means is write what you're curious about, write what you want to know, write what you want to explore. And when you do that, you'll be able to bring an X factor that you wouldn't be able to bring if you were just engaging the logic centers of your brain, if you were just trying to seem smart or sell a book that'll, put 2 million copies on bookshelves. It's really important to maintain your sense of authenticity in your voice. And so I'd encourage you to write a lot and write badly and finish a book before you try to fix a book. Cameron P., Portland, Oregon. For artists looking to draw your characters, what are some general characteristics or lookalikes for how I imagine my characters? If we're talking about general characteristics, I think that the Hellenistic sculptures is a good representation of kind of the posture and some of the elements that I think that I was trying to capture in Red Rising. But as far as what the characters actually look like, I'm hesitant to say any particular actors, because I think then that puts a little too much directorial control in my hands, and would much rather see the interpretations you come up with, because I think that diversity in how you see the characters is going to give a lot more to the story, and the fans can then choose what they think is the best, as opposed to me dictating it on high as though I haven't, this idea of every character. Adrian R., Arizona. What is the most memorable place that I have visited? Oh man. I was lucky enough to go to this island called Palawan in the Philippines one time, and it's a world, like a heritage site, so it's protected ecosystem there. And I think that it was probably the most, the place I've been most in the world that looks like a James Cameron movie, like Avatar. These mangrove trees that are like kind of like alien trees growing up out of the water. You have this incredible transparency in the water, and you see snakes and lizards that seem like they're from another planet. So I'd say Palawan, Philippines. Leah D., Maryland. What's your ideal post-writing frenzy meal? Oh man, it depends. If it was a good writing day, then I'll probably do something like kind of clean, like I'll want sushi. But if it was a bad writing day and I kind of just need the comfort food, then it would be a huge bowl of pasta, probably followed by like a 2 a.m. pizza order. Yeah, that's kind of like when you really need the food to hug you, you know what I mean? Luke W., Illinois. Given 2 days prep time, who wins in a fight to the death between Reap and Sevro? 2 days prep time, it all depends what kind of trinkets can Sevro have. I think that one's a toss-up. I think that the edge you'd have to give to the Reaper simply because he is a more dangerous customer in the end. Sevro would be better if Darrow didn't know that they were going to fight. So Sevro would be better if there was not like a designated time frame. Like 48 hours is up, now you fight. Sevro's going to die. But if it's like you get to fight each other over this course of a week and you never know where Sevro is going to be, then Darrow might be in trouble. James B., Doncaster, UK. Do you consider the different colors to still be human, or have they evolved to something past what we would say is human? I think that they are still human. I think that they'd be much less human with the integration of technology that we could be seeing in our own world in the next 15 years or so. I think that it was important for the Golds to create a society where people retained humanity, where the idea of what human is still the same as it was for the Greeks and the Romans and the societies which they based their own culture on. And you see this very strange and skewed notion of humanism throughout these books and their suspicion about robotics and AI. And so the Golds are very protective in making sure that humanity doesn't evolve past the point of control. Madeline F., North Carolina. Do your inner writer and reader live harmoniously, or do you often find yourself conflicted because of them? That's a great question, and I believe that the conflict between my inner writer and inner reader is something that I've not quite found an answer to. It's very difficult for me to read when I am writing, particularly reading the stuff that's in my genre. I can't read I can't read science fiction or fantasy often when I'm writing. It's also particularly difficult to read authors who are alive because then I'm in competition with those ones. And it's much easier to not feel envious of how good a dead writer is because when they're, they already lost. I mean, like one of my favorite things to do is to find like great writers from the 18th century, and it's like blown away by how good they are. And also not threatened at all because they had their day. But I do think that that's something that a lot of writers struggle with, and you overcome it by having confidence in your own work, and then find the joy of reading your contemporaries, especially people One of my favorite things about being a writer is actually getting to meet other writers that I'm a huge fan of, and sometimes even getting lucky enough to read their next book before it comes out. So I'd say when you're in a good place, you can read pretty well, but when you're not happy with what you're writing, you're pretty much not doing anything in your medium besides buying books you're not going to read and saying one day. It's a TBR stack, just keeps growing. But a lot of times after a long day of writing, all I want to do is watch something stupid like Rick and Morty. O&B, Texas. What other book series do you think your cast of Red Rising characters would interact with the most entertainingly with? Ah, man. I think I'd love to see a Sevro crossover with Aslan from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think Sevro would try to ride Aslan, and I don't think Aslan, being a metaphor for God, would like that very much. But Sevro, I think, would get his way. Caitlin K., British Columbia, Canada. Do you write to music or silence? Do you have a Red Rising playlist? I sometimes write to music. I'm streaky about that. Like every couple months, I'll kind of change up my pattern. I'll listen to scores usually, not soundtracks, because I can't do vocals when I'm writing. Yet at the same time, I think I write best in silence because often, if I'm listening to music, the cadence of the music will then affect the cadence of the prose, and I think that sometimes that can make a scene too epic, or that the scene can be relying too much on the pacing of the music. And often it's easier just to write in silence because then I'm dictating the scene based on how I'm seeing it play out without an outside influence. Plus songs often will end before the scene's done, so I just have to restart the song on repeat. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes I'll have like a song play like 78 times until I finish a scene. But I found silence is often the best. TNL and Sondre R. from Norway. What hobby do you have other than writing? Oh gosh. I like rock climbing. I like skeet shooting and shotguns and moving targets. I love hiking. I like playing with my dog. I like dressing my dog up. She has a collection of lovely sweaters. And I enjoy film, and yeah, those are my main hobbies. Oh, cooking. I love cooking. Yeah. Noah C., Arlington, Texas. If Sevro cared for reading, what would his favorite book be? Oh man, try as I might, I don't know if I can imagine Sevro sitting down with a good book. I think he'd be like, I don't know, Hatchet maybe, something survival related where where he sees some character, surviving in the wilderness. Or he'd like Lord of the Flies, and I think he'd be, rooting for Ralph in Lord of the Flies. Nadia D., Romania. What are your top 5 movies? Okay, so this is like an impossible question because it's always moving. Here's some of my favorites. Lawrence of Arabia, Children of Men. Gosh, it's really hard not to say The Matrix because my dad sat me down when I was 10, and I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies. But my dad sat me down when I was 10, and he said, this is a special occasion because I think this movie is going to open up your mind. And I saw The Matrix, and poof, my head exploded. And life was never the same after watching that. So I'd say The Matrix. I really also like Pan's Labyrinth. I think there's something so beautiful and mythological about it. It just feels like it's a story that's always existed. So those are some of my favorites. I don't know if that was 5, but if I had to add another one, I really like the movie called The Big Chill. The Big Chill is, I think it's a 1980s comedy. And it's about a group of friends who are college friends getting back together to bury one of their friends from college, and about the kind of romances and grudges between them. My parents showed it to me when I was younger, and that was also an R-rated film, so it feels somehow still a little bit like meant for adults and mature, and has some of my favorite acting. What are your top 5 favorite science fiction and fantasy books? Let's see. Game of Thrones, Dune. There's one, the Night in the Cupboard, that I read when I was younger, and I think it's just an amazing book. I love The Princess of Mars, and then probably The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Kimmy M., British Columbia, Canada. If you had to pick a character from a myth, any kind, who would you consider to be your favorite or most interesting, and why? Oh, I like that question. I think that Persephone has always been a very interesting character to me. I think you can see that in the representation of that myth a little bit in Io, in Red Rising. Persephone, because having to spend half her life in the underworld, and this contract of being married with death is something I think that 20, maybe 3,000 years later, we're still obsessed with, and her being linked to spring. When I read that when I was younger, I always thought that was, how to say it, extremely poignant, beautiful. Cole C., Indianapolis, Indiana. Do you have a specific writing routine? Go to a coffee shop, sit on the back porch, laptop and pajamas on the couch. I'm pretty much a laptop and pajamas on the couch kind of guy. I try to go to coffee shops, but I'm easily distractible. Plus those chairs are like really uncomfortable. When I was younger, I went to coffee shops primarily because I didn't have a home office. But now that I have a home office, I have a couch, I have lucky slippers, I got yoga pants and a big sweater. So I prefer doing it in the house. But sometimes if the words aren't really coming to me, I'll move on to my shed in the back of my house and get on a typewriter, because then you can't be editing as you're working as you can on a laptop. And sometimes that helps make the words flow a bit better. Chandler H., Utah. What's your favorite part of the writing process, and what is the most challenging part of the writing process for me? How do you work through it? My favorite part of the writing process is either before it begins, when something is just an idea, because when it's just an idea in your head, it is beautiful, it is perfect, it is the translation of that idea that is so difficult in the writing process. Because, like I've said before, your taste will always be better than your ability to execute. My taste is always better than my capabilities. And so, as an idea, it's so beautiful, perfect, it has no flaws, but then as I'm translating onto paper, oh my goodness, it's just sentence after sentence after sentence, and you get lost in the gobbledygook of it all. But I'd say the biggest difficulty or hurdle I face is indecision with character choices. So character will have, let's say, 3 different paths or 3 different options to overcome an obstacle in front of them. Which one do they choose? If they go to the left, then that could lead to 3 other choices. If they go down the center, that could lead to 6 other choices. And so sometimes that deciding for my characters and what path I want them to go down, and then the cause and effect of taking them down that path will just put me on an endless cycle where I don't write anything. So how do I work through that? Basically, I write it bad. I write the dumb version. And I think by writing the dumb version and finally getting, knowing where the character is going, then I'm finally able to assess the path that they've taken. Because often I think that the problem with with me is, and other writers that I know, is wanting something to be perfect, but it can't be perfect unless it's done, and it's never going to be perfect unless it's done. And get it done bad, and then fix it and make it good. Zach J., Raleigh, North Carolina. What kind of research did you have to do in order to be able to build such a convincing world? This question almost presumes that research stops. It doesn't. It's an ongoing process, and I think that instead of like this concept that I had the intention of reading several books, gathering the information I needed, and then transposing it into Red Rising, I simply have gone down a lot of rabbit holes, reading tons about classical Greeks, classical Romans. I try to get as many primary sources from those times as possible, like Plutarch, his lives, which are basically these comparison essays between a Greek and a Roman, but kind of written in this pulpy way in the 3rd century, were very invaluable to me. But I think that the best thing you can do if you want to write about a subject is to immerse yourself in that subject completely, so that you can almost be free associative with bringing things into the story. And so you have to be a fan of the milieu you're writing about before you can actually write about that milieu in a way that I think is different. Because if I just did the research, then I'd just be taking bullet points. Might as well have just done Wikipedia the entire time. But I just immersed myself in books about the Greeks, the Romans, military history, economics, political science books, and you never know where the inspiration is going to come from. And I think that's what really benefits a writer, is to continue to read constantly. John G., Oklahoma. Do the covers of the novels represent something in the novel? They do. I think that the wing on the first Red Rising book was meant to symbolize the sigils that Darrow gets. Also, the metaphor, the myth of Icarus being pretty heavily used in the story itself. A wing felt like the most natural thing to put on the cover. The laurel for Golden Sun, the laurel that Darrow receives at the end. Morning Star, the scythe that Darrow has, is very important to the story. Also, the color scheme in that one, the blue and the ice, I think that it represents us going to the poles with Darrow and visiting the Valkyrie spires. The feather on iron gold is meant to represent the burning feathers of Icarus, the metaphor of flying too close to the sun. Dark Age, the serpents, especially with Atalantia being such a powerful force in the books, but also the gold ecosystem being like a bed of serpents, but then also the pit vipers that Harmony encounters in the book itself. I think snakes represent the backbiting amongst the golds, but also the cold-blooded reptilian nature of their struggle in and of itself. And then you have the Pegasus, and the Pegasus is meant to, it's kind of a dual meaning, I suppose. Lysander is obviously heavily relying upon the imagery of the Pegasus, but it's also a shout back to Darrow and his Andromeda family crest. Will A. London, UK. Out of every character, who would win a hot dog eating contest? I bet it's Sevro, the gluttonous bastard. Hail Reaper. I think Sevro will give it his best bet, but I think that, when you're competing against Ragnar, who's probably about 2.5 times Sevro's size, Sevro would have to really split his stomach in order to be able to eat as many hot dogs. So I think this is a body mass question, and I think Ragnar would win. But then Volga also has, how would I say it, an obsession with muffins and foods of every type. So I think Volga might give Dad a run for his money. Ryan S., Liverpool, UK. Hangar 17B, how could you? Yeah, I asked myself that same question. When I was on the rewrite, I was on the third, I think maybe the fourth draft, and I could feel the footsteps of doom approaching. And I was like, oh man, I don't have to do 17B, but I think that apprehension and that dread that I was feeling was exactly what I needed the reader to feel. Even when I was writing it, I was thinking that my characters could make different decisions that could make Hagnor 17 be a happy occasion, but that didn't feel true to the story or the character arcs. Thank you guys so much for all your questions. Now I'm off to go finish Red God and try to get it on bookshelves for you and your greedy little paws. Catch you soon.